She didn't come to fall in love. She came to deliver a message. Her father had handed her one sentence. "My father said you needed a wife," and sent her next door like it was nothing, like it was simple, like it was just a thing neighbors said. She was a CEO. She ran 460 people. She did not do simple, but the man at the fence, dusty flannel, dirty boots, not even looking up when her Range Rover pulled in. He didn't care what she ran. He set down his tools. He turned. He looked at her the way no one in a boardroom ever had, like he already knew something. And then he said 4 words. 4 words. No explanation. No apology. Just 4 words. And then he went back inside and let the screen door close behind him. She stood there in that gravel driveway, a woman who had never once been left without a response in her life, holding nothing. What she didn't know yet was that this man, this quiet, disappearing man with dirt under his fingernails, had walked away from a world that would have made her board members go pale. He had seen what was happening to her company before she had. He had already moved to protect her, and he had done it without saying a single word about who he really was. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now, because the stories we tell on this channel are the kind that stay with you long after you stop watching. And drop a comment below telling me, have you ever met someone who knew exactly who they were and said absolutely nothing about it? Because that is exactly what this story is about. She had driven 2 hours from Denver on a Saturday morning with one sentence in her mouth and a reason she had rehearsed twice before she even got out of the car. The sentence belonged to her father. He had said it the evening before, quietly, from his leather chair by the window, looking out at the dark Colorado sky, the way he looked at everything he had already made his peace with. She had been half listening, the way you half listen to a parent when you think you already understand them. She heard the sentence. She went to bed, and somewhere between midnight and morning, it had worked itself loose inside her chest, and she could not get it to stop moving. So she got up, made coffee she didn't finish, got in the Range Rover, and drove. She told herself it was about the easement, the land question, the unresolved boundary between her company's parcel and the neighboring property. She told herself it was business. She was a CEO. Everything was business. He didn't look up when she pulled in. That was the first thing. Most people look up. You pull a black Range Rover onto a gravel drive and the sound alone turns heads. He kept working. Both hands on a warped board, checking the grain, setting it aside with the calm of a man who had decided a long time ago that the world could wait while he finished what he started. His flannel was dusty. His boots were the kind that had never been bought for appearance. And when he finally did turn, unhurried, no performance in it, just a man finishing one thing before he started another. He looked at her with eyes that had no particular urgency in them, just attention, the real kind, the kind that does not ask to be noticed. She gave him the sentence, "My father said you needed a wife," and he went still, not startled, not embarrassed. Still, the way water goes still right before something moves underneath it. And then he said 4 words. She has never told anyone what those 4 words were. Not her general counsel, not her sister, not her father, who already knew. She drove back to Denver with those 4 words on the passenger seat beside her like something she hadn't decided whether to keep. Here is what she did not know standing in that driveway. She did not know that 3 people in Denver were already moving against her, that a board member she had trusted had been building something quietly for 2 years, the kind of thing that is built in the language of fiduciary duty and restructuring and growth, language so clean and reasonable it takes a specific kind of mind to see the blade inside it. She did not know that the company her father had built from $18,000 in a strip mall in Fort Collins was 11 weeks away from being handed to people who would keep her name on the door and hollow out everything behind it. She did not know any of that. What she knew was that the man at the fence had said 4 words and gone back inside and let the screen door close, and that she was still standing in the gravel trying to find the loose edge of a sentence she could not pull apart. That was all she knew. It was enough to bring her back. She came back on a Friday. She had a reason, a cleaner one this time, an annotated copy of the survey with a boundary notation she wanted to verify. It was not a strong reason, and she did not examine it closely. He was at the north fence when she arrived, working a section along the dry creek bed where the posts had been sinking for years in the soft bank. She walked out to him in heels that were wrong for the terrain, and he did not comment on that once. They went along the fence line together, and he showed her where the creek bed had shifted 16 inches east over the past decade, taking a thin strip of soil with it, undercutting the posts, changing the line so slowly that no one looking at it from year to year would have noticed anything at all. Most people only see what's flowering, he said, crouching to press his thumb into the earth near a post base. They miss what's moving underneath. She was not sure he was talking about the fence. She was not sure about a great number of things by the time she got back to her car that afternoon, and she sat in it for several minutes with the engine off and the dark farmhouse windows in front of her, and did not start driving for a reason she could not have named if someone had asked. His daughter came out of the farmhouse that afternoon with a plate and a dish towel and the deliberate calm of a child who had learned early to read the temperature of a room before she entered it. 9 years old. She saw Camille. She stopped. She assessed her for a full 3 seconds without expression, the way children do when they are deciding something important, and then she walked to her father and held out the plate. "Ham and cheddar," she said. "I made 2. Stellan took 1/2. He looked at Camille with an expression that was, if she was reading it correctly, an offer. She took the other half. The girl nodded once as if something had been confirmed and went back inside. Later, sitting in her car in the dark after the kitchen light had finally gone off, Camille understood that she had just been evaluated by a 9-year-old, and that the 9-year-old had apparently decided in her favor, and that this felt, in a way she was not prepared for, like something that mattered. What no one had told Camille, what her father had known for 3 months and chosen not to say, was that the man next door was not what he appeared to be. The research firm in Colorado Springs had found almost nothing when they'd searched his name. No professional filings after 2020, no board memberships, no public record of anything beyond a truck registration and a library card. And when a man that age has that kind of professional silence, it means one of exactly 2 things. He failed so completely, he disappeared. Or he succeeded so completely he chose to. The people looking into him had written both possibilities down. Only one of them was true. And the board member in Denver who had authorized the search was about to find out which one, at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible room. But that is not the part that would stop her cold. The part that would stop her cold was the envelope, the one left at her office on a Saturday morning before anyone arrived. No name on it, no signature inside. Just 2 handwritten pages that proved someone had been watching her company far more carefully than she had, and had been doing it since before she ever pulled onto that gravel drive. Someone who already knew exactly what was coming for her, and had never once said so out loud. The envelope was sitting on her desk when she arrived at 8:45 on a Saturday morning. No courier log, no name. Just a manila envelope with her name written by hand in the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who was taught to write before keyboards made it optional. She almost set it aside. She almost put it in the stack of things she would get to later, the stack that grew every week and shrank only on Sundays when the building was empty and the phones had stopped. But something made her open it. Maybe it was the handwriting. Maybe it was the fact that the front desk attendant, when she asked, said a man had dropped it off before 7 in the morning and left without giving his name. She opened it. She read 2 pages. Then she sat back in her chair and looked out at 17th Street, 17 floors below. The taxis, the pedestrians, the ordinary motion of a city that had no idea what she was holding. And she understood, all at once, and with a cold clarity she had not felt in years, that someone had just handed her the one thing that could save everything her father had built. And that person had driven 2 hours in the dark to do it, and had not waited around to be thanked. The 2 pages were handwritten. No letterhead, no signature. Just the charter provision broken down section by section in plain language, the board memo addressed point by point. And at the bottom, a reversed Colorado court case cited with its full docket number, a case that Keswick's own attorney had built his entire legal argument around, a case that had been quietly overturned on appeal in 2016 and buried so completely that you would only find it if you knew exactly where to look. She read it twice. She pulled up the docket number on her laptop and sat there while the filing loaded and confirmed every word of what the 2 handwritten pages had told her. The provision didn't expire. The acquisition was built on a legal argument that was already dead. Keswick had known this. His attorney had known this. They had sent her a memo citing a case that no longer stood and had counted on her not checking. They had been right about almost everything. They had been wrong about one thing. They had not accounted for the man at the fence. She confirmed Kesik's board start date in the corporate records that same afternoon. 2019. 14 months after her father had quietly extended the charter provision during a routine annual filing, entering it nowhere in the board minutes because it was a protective measure he hoped he would never need. Keswick had joined that board already knowing the provision existed. He had spent 3 years building a proposal designed to get around it, and when he could not get around it cleanly, he had found a lawyer willing to misrepresent a court record to a CEO he believed would not look closely enough. She thought about that for a long time. She thought about how long it takes to build that kind of patience, how many mornings a person has to wake up and decide to keep waiting and keep watching and keep smiling across a conference table at a woman whose company you are quietly preparing to take. She went to his office at 4 o'clock. She did not bring notes. She did not need them. She told him she knew about the reversed case. She told him she knew when he had joined the board and what he had known when he joined it. And Keswick, who had never once in 3 years dropped the language of a reasonable man, looked at her for a moment and then said something that told her everything she needed to know about who he actually was underneath all of it. He said, "You've been driving to a farm in Ridgeway to take advice from a man who shovels hay. Is that how we're making board decisions now?" He said it pleasantly, the way a door is closed pleasantly. She looked at him for a moment. "No," she said. "We're making them based on a document your own lawyer misrepresented to this board." She walked out. She went directly to Priscilla's office, and Priscilla, who had been watching this for 11 years from a desk 2 doors down from the CEO's office, was already waiting. The document was already on the desk, 3 signatures below Keswick's name. A paragraph recommending that the incoming CEO not be briefed on the charter provision because it would unnecessarily complicate the transition. Camille read it twice. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, Denver kept moving. It did not know and it did not care, and that was fine. Some things you have to absorb in silence before they become real. The emergency board meeting was called for a Thursday. She read the 2022 document aloud. She set it in the center of the table without commentary and let it sit there. 2 of the 3 board members who had signed it asked to speak with their attorneys. The third slid her credentials across the table and walked out of the room without a word. The other 2 submitted resignations by end of business. The motion to reject the Vantage Med acquisition was raised by Frances Alcott, the board's longest-serving independent member, a woman who had been in that room since Raymond Hart's 3rd year in business, and who had, it turned out, been waiting a long time for someone to put that document on the table. The vote was 7-2. Keswick's allies were the 2 holdouts. They were outvoted, and everyone understood that their position on that board had become a place no one could stand anymore. Keswick was suspended before they adjourned. The auditors would have access to 6 years of discretionary accounts he had managed without oversight. That part, Camille thought, was going to be its own story. She called her father that evening from the parking garage, sitting in the car before she could bring herself to drive. She told him how the vote had gone. She told him about Priscilla, about the document, about the reversed case that had come apart in Keswick's hands. Raymond listened without interrupting once, which was how she knew he had already known most of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I knew Priscilla would find the right moment." She stared at the concrete wall in front of her. "You knew." He didn't apologize. He said, "Come see me this weekend." She hung up and sat in the dark of the parking garage for a while longer, and then, without planning to, without making a decision she could point to, she started the car and drove west, past the city, past the lights, into the dark corridor of mountains on a road she was beginning to know by feel. She already knew where she was going, she just hadn't said it out loud yet. Because the one person she needed to see was not in Denver. He had never been in Denver. He was at a farmhouse in Ridgeway, 2 hours away, with a porch light on and a folding chair he would carry outside the moment he heard her tires on the gravel. Without being asked, without making it a moment, without saying a single word about what it meant that he already knew she was coming. And she still didn't know his real name. She had been to Ridgeway enough times now that the road had stopped feeling like a destination and started feeling like a direction, the way certain roads do when you have driven them in enough different states of mind that they belong to you a little. She had driven this one anxious, driven it purposeful, driven it with a rehearsed reason sitting in her lap like a prop she no longer needed. This time, she drove it with nothing. No reason, no agenda, no sentence prepared for when she arrived. Just the dark mountains on either side and the headlights pulling the road out of the black one stretch at a time. She had won something that day, something significant. Something her father had spent 30 years building was still standing because of a document on a table and a vote that had gone the right way. She should have felt the size of that. She did, somewhere underneath. But what she kept coming back to, what kept rising through everything else the way cold water rises through warm, was the image of a man she barely knew sitting in the dark 2 hours from the city she had just saved her company in, who had seen all of it coming before she had, who had driven to Denver before sunrise to leave her 2 handwritten pages and had not stayed to watch what they did. That was the part she could not put down. Most people, when they hand you something that valuable, stay. They stay because they want to be in the room when it lands. He had not stayed. He had driven back to Ridgeway and fed his daughter breakfast and gone out to the fence line and kept working. And she needed to understand why. The porch light was on when she turned onto the gravel road. She would think about that later. The fact that it was always on when she arrived, even the time she had not said she was coming, even the time she had not known herself until she was already an hour into the drive. She parked at the fence. She crossed the yard. He was on the porch steps, not reading, not waiting in any performed way, just sitting in the dark the way someone sits at the end of a long day when the quiet outside finally matches the quiet inside. He looked at her across the yard. He did not say, "What are you doing here?" or "I didn't know you were coming." He went inside. He came back out with a folding chair under his arm and set it open beside his own. That was all. She walked up. She sat. And for a long time neither of them said anything at all, and the silence was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that has weight to it, the kind that means something is being understood without either person having to be the one who says it first. She asked him who he was. She asked it quietly, not as an accusation, more the way you ask a question when you already sense the answer is going to rearrange something in you. He was still for a moment. The porch lamp hummed above them. Then he told her. Not everything, not in one clean narrative with a beginning and a middle, but enough. Hartwell Capital. A position that had put him close to the people making the final calls without ever quite making them himself. A restructuring deal he had seen the edges of and not pressed hard enough to understand because he had been 30 years old and had trusted the floor beneath him the way young people trust floors, without checking what it was built on. The merger had gone through. The structure had collapsed 2 years later. No one had gone to prison. Several people had lost everything. His wife had been at her own firm when it happened, had tried to flag it from the inside, had been quietly moved sideways for the trouble. She had been driving home late from a deposition when she died. He did not connect those things with a sentence. He didn't need to. The connection was already there, sitting in the air between them, solid and quiet and old. I left Denver, he said, because I didn't want to be the person who sees things clearly and still lets them happen. I had already been that person once, and she understood then, not just who he was, but why the fence, why the flannel, why 4 years of deliberate silence in a town where the sky wasn't blocked by buildings. It had not been retreat. It had been a decision. A hard, clear, costly decision made by a man who had looked at himself honestly and chosen differently. She sat with that for a long time. The Cimarrons were invisible in the dark, just a mass against the sky where the stars stopped. Willa came out 15 minutes later with her book and her glass of water and settled on the steps below them as if this were ordinary, as if there had always been 3 of them on this porch. She did not ask questions. She opened her book, and Camille sat in the chair Stellan had carried out for her and felt, for the first time and longer than she could measure, the specific relief of being somewhere she had not engineered. She had not planned this. She had not prepared for it. She had not optimized the conditions or managed the outcome or positioned herself carefully before entering the room. She had just driven 2 hours in the dark and sat down. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the most honest thing she had done in years, and she was only beginning to understand what that meant. The audit ran for 3 weeks. When it concluded, the findings went to the Colorado Attorney General's office, and Kesik's attorneys began the quiet, expensive work of negotiating what came next. Camille restructured the leadership team the week after the board meeting, She promoted Priscilla to acting COO, a request Priscilla accepted with the brevity of a woman who had been waiting to be asked for some time and was not going to make a scene about it now that the moment had finally arrived. The company steadied. The culture underneath the numbers shifted in ways that didn't show up immediately on a balance sheet, but that everyone in the building could feel. The way you feel a change in air pressure before the weather turns. Camille stopped reading about the legal case closely. She had done what needed doing. The rest was process. What was not process, what could not be filed or delegated or resolved in a Thursday meeting, was the fact that the man who had made all of it possible still had not told her the fourth word. She had not asked. She was not sure she was ready for the answer. She was not sure the answer was the point anymore. On a Friday in late March, she drove to Ridgeway in the afternoon for no stated reason, the first time she had done that, cleared her calendar deliberately and driven west into the light instead of the dark for once. Stellan was at the eastern edge of the property, planting bare-root fruit trees, spacing them in the methodical grid of a man making plans that extended well beyond the next season. She watched him from the fence line for a while before she crossed over. She asked him eventually why he had never used what he knew. He could have told her about VantageMed the first week. He could have walked up to the fence and handed her the answer and let it mean something for him. He pressed a root ball into the soil and tamped the air around it with his palm. Willa doesn't need a father who's important, he said. She needs one who's present. He kept working. The light went lower and more golden across the valley. A hawk crossed the open air above the eastern ridge and disappeared. And Camille stood there watching his hands, the calluses, the dirt packed under his fingernails, the quiet efficiency of every movement, and understood that she was not looking at a man who had lost something. She was looking at a man who had decided, every single day for 4 years, what things were actually worth. And then a real estate transfer document landed on her desk on a Thursday morning, one that Priscilla had left without a word of explanation. And when Camille read the name on it, she had to read it twice to believe what it was telling her. He had bought the land. The 3.4 acres her company owned, sitting right there between his property and her father's. He had purchased it at market rate. No negotiation, transfer completed the previous afternoon, quietly and completely, the way he did everything. And suddenly the fence they had been standing at for months had a different meaning entirely. She stood in Priscilla's doorway for a long moment, holding the transfer document with both hands, the way you hold something when you are not yet sure what it means, but you already know it means something. Priscilla was at her desk with her coffee, not looking up, giving her the room to process it privately the way she always gave people room, which was one of the things that had made her indispensable for 11 years without anyone stopping to say so out loud. Camille read the name again. Stellan Vore. The parcel number matched. The transfer date was yesterday. Market rate, no negotiation, clean and complete and already done by the time she was reading about it. She thought about the fence line. She thought about the first time she had stood at it and looked across at a man she had categorized instantly and incorrectly and had been quietly revising ever since. She thought about easements and boundary lines and maintenance responsibilities split at the third post from the north marker, all the practical language of a practical reason for contact that had never really been the reason at all. He had not bought 3 acres of Colorado land as a financial decision. She knew that the way you know certain things, not because someone tells you, but because the shape of it is too specific to be anything else. He had bought the distance between them. He had done it without a word, without a gesture, without leaving any room for it to be misread as pressure or declaration or anything that would have made her feel she owed him a response. He had simply made the land continuous, and then he had gone back to his fence, back to, she did not call him. She did not text. She drove to Ridgeway on a Wednesday afternoon, a weekday, her first deliberate midweek visit, her calendar cleared for the first time in 2 years for no reason she had written down. And she stopped at her father's property first. Raymond was in the side yard in the thin afternoon light, watching what remained of the fall growth before the hard frost came. He had a cup of tea. He offered her one. She accepted. They sat on the low stone wall the way they had when she was a teenager, and the wall was the boundary between his plans and the actual ground, and she asked him when he had known about Stellan and exactly when. Month 3, Raymond said. An old colleague from Denver had called asking if he knew a man named Vore who had moved to the county. Word had moved through 3 mutual contacts. He turned the teacup in his hands. I didn't tell anyone, including Stellan. He didn't know that I knew. She looked at her father's profile against the pale Colorado sky and thought about a man who had recognized something in his neighbor, the way a person looks when they have chosen correctly, he had said, and had said nothing, had waited, had sent his daughter next door with a sentence designed to be misunderstood just enough to get her through the gate. You would have seen the resume instead of the man, Raymond said. You would have done research. You would have formed a position. He was right. She had done exactly that the first time she had seen him at the fence, and it had taken her months to see past it. She did not say that out loud. She didn't need to. Her father had already known what she was going to say before she arrived, the way he had always known, the way she was only now beginning to appreciate instead of resist. She walked across to Stellan's property that afternoon. He was at the eastern corner planting the last of the bare root stock, the fruit trees she had watched him space in careful rows weeks earlier, making plans for a spring he was already preparing for. She crossed the fence line. His fence line now, the land continuous and unbroken the way he had made it. And she walked out to him and she asked him something she had been carrying for weeks. She asked him about the 4 words, the ones he had said the very first morning in the driveway when she had delivered her father's sentence and stood there waiting. He stopped working. He looked at her for a moment in the low afternoon light, the Cimarrons going pale gold behind him, the valley spreading out wide and quiet below, and then he told her. 4 words she had turned over in her mind for months, 4 words that had no answer in them, 4 words that were not a rejection and not an invitation, but something rarer than either. An honest thing, said simply, by a man who had decided long ago that honesty was the only economy he was willing to operate in. She stood there in the field with the cold coming down off the mountains and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not relief exactly, not happiness exactly, something quieter than both, something that did not need a name to be real. That evening, Willa made dinner. She announced this at 4:30 with the authority of someone who had given the matter considerable thought and had reached a final decision. The meal was pasta with a jar sauce she had improved, according to her, by adding cheese at 2 separate stages, which she explained was the professional method. Stellan set the table. Camille sat across from Willa and listened to a 20-minute account of a disagreement between 2 girls at school that had been resolved through what Willa described as a very calm and reasonable conversation, but which, from the details, had clearly been nothing of the sort. Camille laughed twice. Both times it arrived before she expected it, the way real laughter does. After dinner, Willa fell asleep on the couch between them during a film, head against her father's arm, feet tucked warm against Camille's leg through the wool of her trousers. Stellan looked across at Camille over the sleeping child between them. He did not say anything. Neither did she. The lamp in the corner made the room amber and small and very still, and outside the ridgeway dark pressed against the windows, and inside, none of them moved, and the moment did not ask to be anything more than what it was. He walked her to the door later. He held her coat for her without making it a gesture. He opened the door and the April air came in, soft and cold and carrying the smell of turned earth from the fields. She stepped out onto the porch. She stood for a moment in the dark. Behind her she could feel the warmth of the house and the lamplight and the sound of Willa breathing somewhere inside, already fully asleep in the way children sleep when they feel completely safe. "Good night, Cora." She stopped herself. "Good night, Camille," he said. His voice was quiet and unhurried the way it always was. "Good night, Stellan." She walked to her car. She drove down the gravel road toward the highway. At the first stop sign, she put both hands on the wheel and noticed they were trembling slightly, and she laughed at herself in the rearview mirror, a woman who had faced down a boardroom full of people trying to take everything her family had built and had not flinched once, trembling at a stop sign in Ridgeway, Colorado, because a man had said goodnight like he meant it. She did not turn the radio on. She drove the 2 hours back to Denver in the dark and the silence, and she let it be exactly what it was. Raymond told her the rest on a Sunday morning over bad coffee on his porch. He told her about the call to Denver, the name he had passed along, the colleague who had helped Stellan understand the charter provision the night before the 2 pages appeared on her desk. He told her Stellan had made 1 phone call. 1. He had not built a case or assembled a team or positioned himself to be the person who saved her. He had made a phone call, written 2 pages by hand, driven to Denver before sunrise, left them at the desk, and driven back. That was all. Raymond looked out at the mountains. He finished his coffee. "That is the rarest kind of man," he said. "The kind who helps and then disappears back into his own life, as if the helping was simply what you do when you see something wrong and you are in a position to make it right." She looked at her father for a long moment. She thought about a man planting trees for a spring he was already living toward. She thought about a 9-year-old who had made sandwiches for a stranger and nodded once and gone back inside. She thought about a porch light that was always on. She drove back to Ridgeway that afternoon, not for a reason, not with a sentence prepared. She turned onto the gravel road and parked at the fence, and Willa was already in the yard and ran to the car before she had the door fully open. And behind her, at the fence line, Stellan was standing in the late afternoon light, looking out at the valley the way a man looks at something he has chosen and does not regret. He heard the car door close. He turned. He looked at her across the yard, and for the first time since that very first morning, he smiled. Not a performance, not a greeting, just a smile, small and certain. The kind that belongs to a person who has stopped being surprised by good things and started simply receiving them. She walked toward him. Willa took her hand on the way. The mountains held their color in the last of the light, and nobody said anything that needed to be said, because some things arrive so quietly and so completely that putting words around them would only make them smaller. If this story found you today, it found you for a reason. The world is loud, and it moves fast, and it does not stop very often to show you what quiet strength actually looks like. What it looks like to choose presence over power, to plant trees for a season you are already faithful to leave 2 pages on a desk and drive home without waiting to be thanked. If that moved something in you, subscribe right now, because that is exactly the kind of story we tell here, every single time. And if you know someone who has been underestimated, who has been written off, who has been looked past by people who never thought to check what was underneath, share this with them. Let them see themselves in it. Because the quiet ones always had the most to offer. We just have to learn to look.